Hello and welcome to another tutorial. So this time around we are going to be adding some improvements to our character controller. In particular, a couple of key things that we want to add in is support for fall damage. I want to also add in alongside that support for being able to generate haptic effects when we take damage or when we actually hit the ground. And we're also going to do just a couple of other little bits of improvements there to it. So let's dive on in. So there's a couple of things that I've already done with this. So one of the things is I've brought in this Haptics manager, and this is actually, I've previously done a tutorial on this, but this is an updated version of it. So the idea is behind this Haptics manager, it allows you to play effects through it. So those effects could impact the low speed motor or the high speed motor, which the low speed one is going to give you more sort of, thudding type sort of haptic feedback, whereas the high speed one is going to give you more sort of buzzing style ones. So the idea behind the Haptic Manager is you play effects through it, and what it does is it balances the levels of those effects so that, say you're already playing an effect and you play another one, then you still are able to actually feel that. And we have some fairly easy setups for the actual effects. We can draw a curve for them. So I've already set up a couple of these assets here. So one for when we take damage, that only affects the high speed motor, and it just gives a quick sort of pulse there, a very short duration one. Whereas the ground impact is a bit of a longer duration, and it impacts the low frequency one, the low speed one. So we've got two different bits of data there, and the Haptic Manager, we can just tell it, cool, play this effect. And we can also override things like the intensity of it, so there's a lot of things that it's able to do there. Key thing is we need to make sure we have it added into the scene, and importantly, I should also make sure I've plugged in a controller that will actually support doing haptic effects. Otherwise, wouldn't really work so well. So in terms of with the Haptic Manager, as I said, I've brought that in from another project. It's the version I used from a semi-recent game. Like with all of the code, something that you're freely able to use in any of your own projects. It has also support for integrating with things like Cinemachine impulses and also timeline. So there's quite a few extra things that you can do with that if you're wanting to. But for now, let's take a look at what happens with falling, because actually there's a couple of issues with it. So if I go and grab myself a jetpack, and I fly up, and I'm going to fly up really, really, really high. And what I want you to pay attention to is the speed that we fall at. Because what you'll notice is it actually feels more like a glide than a fall. We land at the exact same speed as we sort of started falling at. So that's actually one of the things that we want to fix up and improve first. We want to make it so that we're able to actually be keeping track sort of how long we've been falling for, and make it that we fall faster over time. So what I'm going to do, starting point for this, is going to be in our ground movement. So we do already have some stuff we're tracking here, like the actual time in air. What I'm going to do is I'm also going to track the time falling, because that's going to allow us to apply an acceleration to the character over time. Because we're kind of overriding a lot of the physics for the character intentionally to give us the behavior and the performance that we want. So, okay, that's good. Then in our checks here, where if we're grounded, so if we're grounded, well, at that point we want to set the time falling to 0. So just want to make sure we're updating that in sort of the key locations where we're setting that. And then the other place where we should make sure we update, and we're actually going to also sort out the using of this. So here, what we want to do is we want to make that fall acceleration multiplied by time falling. So we'll need to go and update our config so it has that. So we've got our separate falling section here. So that, and I found just from testing a value of around 20 feels about right for it. So, okay, we've got that bit of data set up. We're getting closer to having things sorted. We've also got to handle this side with jumping, because with jumping, we do reach a point where we then switch to this fall phase. So here, I want to also set the time falling to 0. So I've now got it that I am setting the time falling to 0. The one thing that I don't have, and if I go to the ticking of movement, we're keeping track of the time in air and that here, but we're not keeping track of the falling, and this is probably the best spot to update that. So what I'm going to do is, if we're not grounded or in coyote time, then I can just update this, and we can just do that as a plus equals. So it'll simplify this logic a little bit. We bring that in, and then what I want to do is I want to check if we are not jumping or we are in the jumping fall phase, and then our time falling, we add delta time to it. So that should be enough to get it so that when we are falling, we actually increase in speed. So let's test this out. So I want to go grab a jetpack and then fly up nice and high, and then turn off the jetpack. And that immediately feels a lot better. Our jump still feels good, but the falling, we're progressively increasing the speed, and it actually we get that sense of that sort of acceleration there, which is great. So that's good. We've got that happening the way that we want. So that's much better. Now we want it to be applying damage when we hit the ground. So we do already have a on-hit ground event here. So we can see, if we take a look at where we're using that, we run that here when we become grounded. And the logic that it currently uses is that it has to be greater than this to play the sound. So we kind of always want this to fire, and that means we need to make a couple of other changes for this. So I'm going to break a whole bunch of things. Again, my standard approach is break a bunch of things and then fix up the errors. So this on-hit ground is going to provide an impact speed. Now, the hitting of ground was something that we don't currently have it being hooked in the player version of the character motor, and we also don't have it being hooked in just the base version there of it. We do have a impacting with the ground here for the audio. So that is going to get impact speed. And what we will end up needing to do is the character motor itself is going to need to be detecting that it's hit the ground. So we're going to add this into the character motor, like that. Now it's not going to be playing any sounds there. So, okay, we'll still have a few things that are broken, and that's okay. And we'll see here, one of the things that's broken about is we don't have that impact speed yet. And I'm not going to fix that just yet, because this check, we actually are going to move that into the character motor itself for firing off the sound. So we'll do some logic here for firing that off, but we can't access the time in air now. So we actually need to, again, move things around a little bit, because time in air was something that I was tracking here in the specific movement. So I'm going to actually take that and move that over to our actual state. So we have that being tracked here. So what that will allow us to do is down here, we can just do state dot. Now that will mean I have created, and I'll need to also change the access level. That will mean I've created a bunch of other errors over here. So anywhere where it was accessing the time in air, I need to update that as well. Thankfully, autocomplete is on top of it and handling that. So that's looking pretty good. So, okay, so far so good. We do still need to actually play a sound here. So play sound. So that's still something that we have to set up. We haven't got that going yet. We haven't got the impact speed going yet. So we do have a bunch of things that are currently broken, and that's okay. That's intentional. What I want to do is I want to get the logic implemented here so that I know that it actually is working from a point of view of being able to apply the damage, and that the interfaces are what I want them to be. So I'm actually going to set up a few things with the falling. One is going to be min fall speed to take damage. And I'm going to say that that is maybe 15. And I'm going to then have a public float. And then this will be the fall speed for maximum damage. So that we might make that 50. So we've got a bit of a sense of here is this, any speed over 50, we won't take any additional damage. That's just going to be the maximum amount. Then we're going to have our minimum fall damage. And there's a couple of different ways we could work with this depending upon sort of style of how we want things to go. And I've seen both setups in games. So one setup is this could be a percentage of the maximum health. So regardless of what the player's health scales to, they always take proportionally the same amount of damage. Or we could have it be a fixed amount, but that would mean if the character gains more health, that they then fall damage can become meaningless. So I think a percentage-based one actually works a bit better. So we're going to say that the minimum amount taken is 5%. And we'll make sure that it's got sliders for it. And then we'll do the same for the max. The difference is that the maximum fall damage is going to be 1. So if you fall from too high a height, you are guaranteed to take a lethal amount of damage. So what that will allow me to do then is over here, if that impact speed is greater than the minimum speed to take fall damage, and actually should be greater than or equal to, well then firstly I want to work out where do I sit between the min and the max. So this is where an inverse lerp comes in really handy. So our speed proportion, we do a mathf inverse lerp, we give it config, and we give it the min full speed to take damage. We give it the full speed for maximum damage, and our impact speed. And what inverse lerp will do is it will give us back a value between 0 and 1 based upon where that impact speed sits between those two values. Because what that lets me then do is I can say, okay, damage percentage is a mathf lerp from config, and our minimum full damage percentage, it's auto-completed incorrectly there, and in this case our maximum full damage percentage, and then we do use the speed proportion. So that's good, we've got that looking right. And then the actual amount of damage, so our actual damage to apply is our config max health multiplied by the damage percentage, and then all we do is we go on take damage. The source, well, there really isn't a source for this, and we apply that damage. So that will give us impact damage happening, which is great. Now we need to go and fix up the things we done broke, because we do have, although it's in the 1 error, we need our impact speed here. So we need a way to be calculating that. Now, one of the problems that we can run into is with the speed, the point at which we impact, our speed is just going to immediately go to 0. So by the time we pick up that we're grounded, we might not actually have the speed there. Now I could grab it from the collision, but I'd like to be using the actual velocity that we know we were trying to go at. So what I want to do is I actually want to essentially keep track of what our last velocity was. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to have a public vector3 last requested velocity is obviously going to be a vector3 0 to start with. And then with that, what I would do is when we calculate the velocity, so if we go to our fixed update, at the very end of this, we can go and say, well, state last requested velocity is linked rigid body dot velocity. So now we're keeping track of that. And then what that means is in the ground movement here, our impact speed is our state last requested velocity magnitude. So that's good. That should fix the error. I don't want to forget, though, about the fact that we need to play the impact sound. So this is where what I'm going to do is I'll set up another Unity event here. So I'll have a serialized field, protected Unity event on, and this will, I think it's still useful to have the location. We'll have on impacted ground. Well, actually, we might go for that specifically indicating the sound. So on play impact ground sound. I'll just go new. And actually, what I will do is I will update all of these to the slightly cleaner syntax that we're able to do now. just makes it a lot neater. So I quite like the new syntax there, and it was something that someone mentioned in the comments as being a thing, which is really cool. So anytime there's things that you spot, always happy to have input like of that, because it's great to learn new things. So on impact, play the ground sound, invoke at the location. Now I might have already updated this to take in the speed, so I will get rid of that. So that looks good. Let's see how we're going error-wise. None, which is good. Now there's a couple of things we're going to need to hook up here. The play impact sound is one that we need to hook up. So that gets linked up to our sound emitter. Time only, and on hit ground, and we'll do the exact same thing for the third person one. So I want to try and make sure keeping these both in sync so that they are both always usable. So what should happen now is I should, if I'm falling, get damage applied based upon how far I've fallen. So from there would be reasonable to probably take some. Now we don't see any being taken, so let's go up really high. It might be that we need to adjust our speed thresholds a little bit. So we don't see any damage happen there. So what we just want to check is it's also very likely, because we changed the actual interface for stuff, we can see this is not properly hooked up. So this one actually needs to connect to the character motor on hit ground, and we have to do that for the third person one as well. So a slightly different path that things are going through. So it goes to the character motor on hit ground for both of those. We save just for good measure. So let's test now. We might still need to tune the thresholds, because these are just ballpark numbers. That height should expect some damage. And we do. We take a chunk of damage there. And if I go up really high, might manage to get high enough that we take off all of the health. But again, there we go. Yep. So took off all of the health. So that's good. We've got falling damage happening. We've got that acceleration due to falling. So we've got that slightly better feel happening there. So what I want to do now is I want to get the haptics going. I want to get it so that when I actually impact, that we have those being played, and also when we're taking damage. So I'm going to have a separate section here for the haptics. And what I'll do is have a public bool enable haptics. Always good to have it be something that can be toggled off or on. I recommend just having that in there from the beginning. Now, there's a couple of things we do need to actually sort of do with this, because I want to be able to play the effect, but I want to be able to play the effect while adjusting the intensity. So I've got a few bits of data that I need to configure for each effect, and I have two effects currently. Good chance we'd end up with more. So I have one for impacting ground and one for taking damage. So this is where what I would do is I am just going to set up a little class, and this is our haptic effect config. So what this will do is it's going to have a link to the haptic effect. It's going to have a float for the min intensity, which will be 0, and one for the max, which will be 1. We'll set up our range limit just to make it nicer for working with. And then what we want to do is, because a bunch of cases we're going to essentially go, cool, here's this percentage, give us back the intensity. I'm going to just add in a little helper function, get intensity. We'll take in percentage, and really easy function, mathflerp, and it's auto-completing the full set. So that's good, because then what I would have is I would have a public haptic effect impact haptics, and a public one for, we'll call this damage haptics. So we've got these set up, and one thing that we did miss that would have been a problem is that should be haptic effect config, our little class that we set up here. Because what this lets us then do, what's its, if I remember to save, almost a decade of using Unity, and it is still one of the most common things I run into is, why is my code not working? And it's because I haven't saved it. So our impact one, we'll hook that up, and our damage one, we'll hook that up. And we might say the minimum intensity, so it always can play with a little bit of intensity. Might make it 0.1, I think, for each one of these. So that looks good. Again, just save everything. So now I can actually hook these up. And it's pretty straightforward for connecting these up. There's not actually a lot we need to do. So we'll do the hitting of ground first. So what I would say is f config and enable haptics. Then what I want to do is we'll also check fconfig impact haptics. We might set up an isValid option there for it. So what we could do is have public bool isValid, and that just checks that effect is not equal to null. Just gives us an easy way then to go, okay, are haptics enabled? And do we have a valid impact one? If we do, then we can just go haptics manager, instance, play effect with intensity. So then we have our config impact haptics and our effect. Now the intensity, well, we already have our damage percentage here. So what I would be doing is I would actually go config impact haptics, get intensity, and then use the damage percentage like that. So that's good. We've got that effect hooked up, and we should also then hook up the one for when we take damage, which I'm going to steal largely this because it's going to be very similar. And what it will mean is that we get, if we take full damage, we'll actually get both haptic effects complete because they're working slightly differently and because the haptics manager will blend them together. So that's actually going to work out really nicely. So in this case, this would be damage haptics. And what we want to do is we again need to have a percentage here. So what I think would make sense is if we do something like damage percentage is the amount divided by our max health. So it's proportional to the maximum amount of health that we've got. So I think that should work quite nicely. So everything's hooked up for that. So let's test this out and see how this behaves. So I'm using the controller now, and I do already have some damage zones here. So what I should find, and Might be able to just hear it, but the controller is vibrating. And if I go and pick up the jetpack and use that, and then fall, then I get a bit of a haptic effect. I didn't take too much damage there. If I go up even higher though, and then fall, then I should get a larger hit. And I do get a bit more of a hit. It's probably something where what I would do is actually then look at upping the minimum intensity here for the impacting the ground. So I might actually start that at like a 0.5. So the haptic effect is primarily playing at a larger strength. So if I do that and then go up and fall, then I get more of a solid thud. I could again increase that a little bit more so that it has a stronger intensity. And we'll do a similar thing. So what I'm going to do is fly up and then turn off the jetpack. And I get much more of a thud there with that. So that's good. We've got our fall damage happening. We've got our increasing acceleration speed as we actually move. And we've got things like fall damage and haptics happening, which is really handy. The one other final thing I want to do, and this was just something I discovered actually just as part of testing this when I was working on it, was originally I did have this for the grounded check performing a sphere cast, and I changed it to a ray cast because it was having a bit of difficulty with performing the step up with that. So I can actually improve this though, and what I can do is I'm going to actually switch it back to a sphere cast, but I want the radius. So the radius for the cast, because previously I would just use the actual character radius. So what I'm going to do is have it be config radius, and we use a small fraction of it. I don't think this needs to be configurable at this stage, but I think just having a small radius like that means that the sphere cast makes it a little bit easier for, because where it was getting stuck was just if over a ledge, so if your center point moved just over that, you could get sort of stuck. So this makes that a lot harder to have happen. So that means things like stairs are going to work a little bit more reliably. And that was the problem that was running into, that the stairs were proving a bit of a challenge. Whereas now, if I go off the edge, they're fairly good. So just improves that. So small change, but one that makes a bit of a difference there to feel. And the final very easy thing I'm going to do is just apply these changes over to the first and third person one. And then I'm going to just test the third person one has everything working as well. So the third person does need slightly different config. So I can copy, thankfully, this stuff from one to the other. Just because I want to make sure that keep these both in sync, and if something is working in one, then I want to make sure it's working in the other. So that looks good. So third person, we want to make sure that, okay, if I run into the damage thing, so it's good, I'm taking damage, I get the haptics. I go and grab the jetpack, so that's working. I use the jetpack, fly up, and then turn that off. And I take damage, and I have the haptic effects. So I've got it working for both. So I'll again apply those changes, so just so we know that it's working for both. So we've made some nice updates there. We have fall damage, We have increasing speed as we fall. We have haptic feedback on that happening and on damage happening. So it'd be quite easy for us now to, any other things that we wanted to have haptic effects happen with, we could easily do that as well. So it gives us a good sort of platform to build additional things onto there if we want to. Thanks, folks. Hope you found the video interesting and helpful. If you have, chuck in a like and subscribe. It really helps out. It's really appreciated. If you've got any questions or suggestions, things you'd like to be seeing in any of these videos, chuck in a comment below. If you were looking for the code for the project, the code is available up on GitHub. I'll put a link to that in the description. And you can use the code in any of your own projects, commercial, non-commercial ones. It's able to be used in those. And finally, if you're looking for other ways to support the channel, then I do have a Patreon, and there's a link to that in the description as well. But until next time, bye!